Humanity's introduction to the galactic community went about as smoothly as teaching quantum physics to a toddler, lots of pointing, frustrated sighs, and the occasional diplomatic incident involving bodily fluids. The collective species agreement, that grand document meant to unite the stars in harmony, had somehow failed to account for the bizarre linguistic quirk where a species might name vessels of healing after concepts their military actively denied their enemies. The first time a human delegate announced the arrival of the medical frigate UNHS Mercy to the Galactic Diplomatic Corps, 3 translation devices shorted out and a Rexan diplomat molted prematurely. You name your healing vessels after the thing your warriors withhold. The Jian ambassador's secondary breathing sacs inflated with confusion. Is this what humans call irony? No, that would be our garbage scows, the human ambassador replied with the practiced smile of someone who'd had this conversation 17 times that week alone. Across the vastness of charted space, a peculiar consensus had formed among the 37 spacefaring civilizations: humans were confusing. Not dangerous exactly, their military capabilities ranked somewhere between quaint and adorably determined, but their contradictions made for diplomatic headaches. They'd name weapons after peace deities, medical ships after battlefield concepts, and somehow expected everyone else to follow their backward logic. The current diplomatic summit, hosted in a neutral arbor station hanging in orbit around a star that hadn't even been important enough to name, it was simply reference point 42J, had devolved into yet another semantic debate about human naming conventions. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, with its rotating rings providing gravity and its translucent dome offering views of the cosmos that would inspire poets if anyone bothered to look up from their notes. Perhaps, suggested the delegate, a being composed primarily of crystalline structures and passive-aggressive diplomatic tactics, we should establish a standardized naming protocol for all vessels. The human's insistence on these emotional appellations creates unnecessary confusion. We named our ships long before we knew you existed, the human delegate countered, suppressing an eye roll that would have registered on seismic equipment. You can't expect us to rename our entire fleet because the universal translator gets poetic hiccups. The Maxian representative, a gelatinous mass of neural tissue suspended in a hovering containment field, pulsed with what passed for amusement in their species. The humans have a point. We cannot standardize creativity out of existence. Besides, my species named our first interstellar vessel Unexpected Gaseous Release, after our discoverer's reaction to achieving faster-than-light travel. A ripple of translator-delayed laughter circulated through the chamber, all except for the ZTH Kalani delegation, humanoid arthropods who communicated primarily through precise mandible clicks and judgmental antenna twitches. Their lead diplomat stepped forward, towering over the human representative. The naming of medical vessels after Mercy creates dangerous expectations, the ZTH Kalani clicked. In battle, we do not expect mercy. We expect efficient elimination of threats. Such linguistic softness reflects humanity's fundamental weakness. The human delegate leaned back, a smile playing at the corners of their mouth. And yet, when the Proxima mining colony faced collapse, it was our weakness that saved 16 of your worker drones. Before the ZTH Kalani could respond with what would undoubtedly be a cutting reminder about inefficient resource allocation, the chamber's emergency communication system activated with a shrill tone that transcended species-specific hearing ranges. The holographic display at the center of the room flickered to life, showing a distress signal originating from the edges of controlled space. Emergency distress beacon activated. Multiple casualties. Mining operation catastrophic failure. Atmospheric breach. Structural integrity compromised. Mixed species colony. Medical assistance required. Coordinates follow. The signal cut off with the abruptness of someone who had more pressing concerns than proper communication protocols. The room's mood shifted instantly from bureaucratic tedium to focused attention. The nearest vessel is, the station's AI calculated, its voice neutral in a way only artificial intelligences can manage, the human medical frigate UNHS Mercy. Estimated arrival time, 17 standard hours. All eyes, optical sensors, and sensory apparatuses turned toward the human delegate, who was already activating their communication device. "This is Ambassador Chen to UNHS Mercy. You're being redirected to emergency coordinates. Prepare for mixed species triage." The ZTH colony delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly. "We cannot entrust our people to a vessel whose very name celebrates weakness." The human didn't bother looking up from their device. "Then I suggest you find another ship within 17 hours that can handle ZTH colony physiology." "No. Then perhaps this would be an excellent time to observe why we name our ships as we do." As the chamber erupted into a cacophony of concerned voices and clicking appendages, the ambassadorial aides began compiling data on the mining colony. The operation was a joint venture between 4 species, including the notoriously territorial Grak and the methodical Taurans, who had an ongoing blood feud dating back 3 centuries. That they were working together at all was considered a minor diplomatic miracle. The colony reports multiple hull breaches, the station's AI updated. Estimated casualty rate, 43% and rising. Toxic atmospheric contamination spreading. Medical emergency protocols activated. The human ambassador looked up at the arguing delegates and cleared their throat. "Ladies, gentlemen, and variations thereupon, perhaps instead of debating semantics, we might consider observing the Mercy in action. After all," they added with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes, "seeing is believing, as we primitives like to say." The Jian ambassador's breathing sacs deflated in what might have been resignation. "Very well. We shall observe your Mercy." Little did they know that observation would redefine their understanding, not just of a word, but of humanity itself. The mining operation at asteroid PX 3791, unimaginatively dubbed Profitable Venture 12 by its corporate overlords, had been a marvel of interspecies cooperation right up until it wasn't. Now it was a marvel of interspecies catastrophe, which, as any bureaucrat could tell you, required significantly more paperwork. The asteroid's structural integrity had collapsed following what preliminary reports described as an unexpected subterranean methane pocket ignition, which was corporate speak for, somebody lit a match near the fart rocks. The resulting explosion had ripped through 3 habitat domes, depressurized 6 mining shafts, and turned the carefully calibrated life support system into modern abstract art. Back at Arbor Station, the diplomatic contingent watched the disaster unfold through the clinical detachment of long-range sensors. A holographic display dominated the chamber's center, projecting real-time footage from the mining operation's still-functioning cameras. It wasn't pretty. Emergency lighting cast everything in an apocalyptic red glow, highlighting the chaos of bodies from multiple species scrambling for safety. 13 standard hours until the Mercy arrives, announced the AI with the emotional investment of someone reading a grocery list. Current casualty estimate, 58%. The ZTH colony delegate's mandibles clicked in what xenolinguists had categorized as disapproving calculation. At this mortality rate, rescue operations are inefficient use of resources. Standard protocol would be to document losses and redirect personnel to unaffected operations. The human ambassador didn't bother hiding their disgust. "We don't write off lives as acceptable losses when there's a chance to save them." A peculiarly human sentiment, observed the Maxian representative, neural tissue pulsing thoughtfully in its containment field. "Though I note your species' history suggests otherwise." "We're working on it," the human replied through gritted teeth. "Evolution of ethics takes time." The communication array pinged, and the chamber's attention shifted to a new hologram, this one showing the interior of a starship bridge. The captain of the UNHS Mercy appeared, their uniform bearing the distinctive caduceus symbol that had puzzled xenobiologists for years. Why would humans use venomous reptiles as a medical emblem? "This is Captain Torres of the Mercy," they stated, voice clipped and professional. "We're pushing our engines to maximum. New ETA 10 hours, 17 minutes. Requesting all available medical data on affected species. The RE delegate stepped forward, crystalline form refracting light across the chamber. "Captain, we are transmitting physiological baselines for all registered workers. However, I must warn you that the GRAC and Torin personnel may resist treatment from a shared medical facility." The captain's expression didn't change. "Their preferences are noted. Their survival is our priority." "You misunderstand," the RE continued. "These species have a blood feud dating back." "With all due respect, Ambassador," Torres interrupted, "I've treated Hatfields and McCoys in the same emergency room. We'll manage." The transmission ended before the universal translator could process the historical reference, leaving several diplomats blinking in confusion. The Jian ambassador's breathing sacs inflated with concern. "The human vessel is accelerating beyond safety parameters. They'll burn out their engines." The Torin observer noted with the detached interest of someone watching an experiment reach its inevitable conclusion. The human ambassador smiled thinly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll learn why we chose that name." Hours crawled by, punctuated by deteriorating updates from the mining operation. The station's AI dispassionately reported rising casualty figures, while diplomatic aides quietly calculated the economic impact of the disaster. Several species representatives had already begun drafting formal statements of condolence, efficient, if nothing else. Then, with an abruptness that startled the chamber, the holographic display shifted. The Mercy had arrived, 2 hours ahead of even their accelerated schedule. How did they? The Maxian neural tissue pulsed with surprise. They bypassed standard deceleration protocols, the station's AI explained. A highly dangerous maneuver with 93.3% probability of catastrophic drive failure. And yet, the human ambassador observed mildly, there they are. The Mercy was not an impressive vessel by galactic standards. Where ZTH Kalani medical ships were sleek, angular weapons platforms that happened to contain medical facilities, and Maxian hospitals were perfect spheres of theoretical mathematical purity, the human ship looked cobbled together. It bore the scars of multiple renovations, modules grafted onto the original design like architectural afterthoughts. Its hull showed the patina of multiple repair jobs, some professional, others distinctly not. That vessel has seen combat, observed the ZTH Kalani delegate with the first hint of respect they'd shown. 17 engagements confirmed, the human ambassador nodded. And 212 disaster responses. The station's communication array activated again as the Mercy established a feed from their deployment bay. Organized chaos filled the screen. Medical personnel in matching uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, preparing equipment calibrated for multiple species. Floating gurneys lined up near the airlock as teams checked environmental suits. A new figure stepped into view, compact, efficient, wearing a uniform with more pockets than seemed physically possible. The name badge identified them as Chief Medical Officer Patel. "We have preliminary scans of the damaged sections," the CMO reported, not bothering with diplomatic niceties. "Multiple atmosphere breaches, toxic gas exposure, crushing injuries, radiation contamination. We're deploying in 3 teams, Alpha for extraction, Beta for on-site stabilization, Gamma for critical transport. First wave launches in 7 minutes." Captain Torres reappeared in the feed, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath their eyes. "We're receiving resistance from GRAC security forces. They're refusing to allow Torin personnel into their emergency shelters." "Unsurprising," muttered the Torin observer. "Options?" Torres asked. The CMO's response was immediate. "We deploy regardless. Security team with non-lethal suppression gear for any actively interfering parties. We treat everyone we can reach." "Agreed," Torres nodded. "Diplomatic Corps, be advised we're proceeding with rescue operations under Universal Code 3. The human ambassador straightened slightly, while several alien delegates exchanged confused glances. "What is Code 3? Asked the RE representative. It means, the human explained quietly, that they will provide aid to all parties without distinction of species, political affiliation, or conflict status. It also means they will defend their medical personnel with lethal force if necessary. They would fire upon wounded individuals. The Jian seemed shocked. No, the human corrected. They would fire upon anyone preventing them from reaching wounded individuals. There's a difference. On the holographic display, the first teams deployed from the Mercy. They launched in small, nimble shuttles that darted toward the asteroid's rupturing domes. Each craft bore the same red symbol that adorned their mothership, a simple cross that somehow conveyed meaning across species barriers. The chamber watched in collective silence as the human medical teams breached the asteroid's compromised habitats. Initial feeds showed conditions worse than the sensors had detected, structural supports groaning under pressure differentials, toxic gases pooling in low-lying areas, and wounded from multiple species huddled in rapidly failing emergency shelters. The first confrontation came quickly. A GRAC security officer, himself bleeding from a head wound, blocked the entrance to a shelter containing both GRAC and Tauran miners. No Tauran leaves with your team, the guard rumbled, universal translator struggling with his damaged vocal apparatus. They caused this. They pay consequences. The human team leader didn't hesitate. Everyone leaves, or I will personally ensure you're the last one evacuated. Your choice. The camera feed briefly cut out during what the ambassador later described as a frank exchange of perspectives. When it returned, both GRAC and Tauran wounded were being loaded onto evacuation transports. Back in the diplomatic chamber, the Zethkalani delegates' mandibles clicked rapidly. Their medical personnel threatened the security officer. No, corrected the human ambassador with a smile that could cut diamonds. They promised consequences for obstruction of medical aid. That's standard operational procedure. Hour by hour, the Mercy's teams pushed deeper into the failing mining complex. They established triage centers in stable pockets, converted mining equipment into makeshift medical tools, and improvised treatments for species they'd never encountered before. The ship's database was comprehensive, but reality always found exceptions. The diplomatic chamber fell silent when the next crisis emerged. A massive secondary collapse trapped 16 miners, 8 GRAC, 5 Taurans, and 3 Jiens, in a pocket with rapidly depleting oxygen. The only access was through a maintenance shaft barely large enough for the smallest human crew member. Then I'll have to get them all on the first go, was the simple reply. The assembled diplomats watched, some with multiple sets of eyes, as the lone human medic crawled into a hole that by all scientific calculation should collapse around them. The camera feed switched to the medic's helmet cam, showing the claustrophobic journey through dust and darkness. They're going to die, stated the Tauran observer matter-of-factly. The human ambassador said nothing, but their knuckles whitened as they gripped their chair. The feed showed the trapped miners huddled together despite their species' notorious enmity. Oxygen deprivation had apparently proven more persuasive than centuries of cultural hatred. The human medic quickly assessed the situation, distributed emergency breathing apparatus, and began the impossible task of guiding 16 barely conscious aliens through a tunnel meant for maintenance drones. This is inefficient, observed the ZTH Kalani. They should prioritize those with highest survival probability. The human ambassador's reply was soft but carried throughout the chamber. That's not what mercy means. Against all statistical probability, against the laws of structural physics, against the predictions of the station's AI, the human medic emerged from the tunnel 17 minutes later, filthy, bleeding, and followed by 16 miners who, according to all logical analysis, should have been written off as acceptable losses. As the diplomatic chamber erupted into shocked murmurs, the Jian ambassador's breathing sacs inflated to their maximum capacity. How did they? I don't think, interrupted the human ambassador, that's even the most impressive thing you'll see today. They were right. It wasn't. The diplomatic chamber had transformed from a venue of political posturing to something resembling a war room. Holographic displays showed multiple feeds from the Mercy's medical bays, where organized chaos reigned supreme. Beings from 6 different species lay on beds calibrated for anatomies the designers had never anticipated, while human medical staff moved with the precision of dancers in a well-rehearsed ballet of urgency. Fascinating, murmured the Maxian representative, neural tissue pulsing with scientific curiosity. They've modified standard treatment protocols for GN physiology on the fly. On screen, a human doctor was performing what appeared to be respiratory support for a GN miner whose breathing sacs had collapsed. The procedure involved a jury-rigged apparatus that would have given any medical certification board collective apoplexy. That's not in any xenobiological manual, the GN ambassador observed, own breathing sacs inflating with concern. Improvisation, the human ambassador explained with a shrug. It's what we do. The Zetkalani delegate's mandibles clicked in what might have been disapproval or reluctant admiration. Your medical personnel operate with disturbing autonomy. They operate with whatever keeps people alive. A new alert drew the chamber's attention to a different feed. The Mercy's main surgical bay had received critical cases, including 3 ZTH Kalani workers with thoracic ruptures that exposed their secondary nervous systems to toxic gases. Those injuries are non-survivable, stated the ZTH Kalani representative flatly. Treatment attempts waste resources. As if in direct rebuke, the feed showed the ship's surgical team already prepping for procedures that, according to all standard medical protocols across known space, should not be attempted. The lead surgeon, a human with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much, glanced at the patient charts and immediately began issuing orders. The surgeon is exceeding recommended intervention parameters, noted the station AI, with the mildest suggestion of surprise an artificial intelligence could muster. The human ambassador smiled. They do that. Hours blurred together as the diplomatic corps witnessed the Mercy's personnel working well beyond normal endurance thresholds. Some alien representatives expressed concern when human medical staff began taking stimulants to remain functional, while others noted with alarm that several humans had continued working despite sustaining injuries during rescue operations. The real revelation came 14 hours into the crisis. Critical supply update, announced the Mercy's logistics officer over the comm system. We're approaching depletion on universal blood substitutes, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and neural regeneration compounds. Triage protocols recommended. Captain Torres appeared in the feed, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath their eyes. Understood. Remaining supplies to be allocated based on survival probability and wound severity, regardless of species. Captain, interrupted a communications officer, we're receiving a priority transmission from the ZTH Kalani diplomatic vessel. They're demanding preferential treatment for their nationals, citing Interstellar Medical Protocol 47b. The chamber's attention shifted to the ZTH Kalani delegate, whose exoskeleton clicked with what might have been embarrassment. Protocol 47b is an outdated regulation, the representative observed with crystalline precision. But still legally binding, countered the ZTH Kalani. On screen, Captain Torres' expression hardened. Please inform the ZTH Kalani vessel that aboard this ship, all patients receive equal treatment based on medical necessity, not diplomatic pressure. If they object, they're welcome to send their own medical ship. Until then, Mercy protocols remain in effect. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in uncomfortable silence. Your captain risks diplomatic censure, the GN ambassador's breathing sacs deflated with concern. The human ambassador shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time. A new crisis emerged when the asteroid's final structural supports began to fail. 32 miners and 2 Mercy crew members remained in the deepest section, with oxygen depleting rapidly. Extraction would require passing through a section flooded with radiation levels that exceeded safe exposure thresholds by several orders of magnitude. Establishing a stable path would require approximately 20 minutes of exposure, calculated the station's AI. Human cellular damage would be significant. The feed showed Captain Torres in conference with the medical team. Options. Radiation shielding is insufficient for those exposure levels, stated the chief medical officer bluntly. Anyone making that run would sustain lethal damage. Agreed. Prepare the remote drones. The drones can't carry the injured fast enough, a junior officer objected. We'd lose at least half. Captain Torres stared at the schematics for a long moment. Understood. I'll make the run myself. Prep the anti-rad protocols and have regeneration treatment standing by. Captain, that's not. That's an order, Doctor. The human commander intends to sacrifice their biological integrity for minors. This exceeds rational risk assessment. It's not about rational assessment, the human ambassador replied softly. It's about mercy. What followed was recorded in multiple species historical archives. Captain Torres, protected by woefully inadequate shielding, personally led 5 extraction trips through the radiation zone, ensuring every single miner and crew member escaped. Medical telemetry broadcast to the horrified diplomatic chamber showed the captain's cellular degradation in real time. After the final group reached safety, Torres collapsed. Medical teams rushed to administer treatment for acute radiation poisoning, their movements containing none of their previous precision, only urgency bordering on desperation. Survivability assessment, inquired the ZTH Kalani, mandibles unusually still. The station's AI calculated silently for 2-3 seconds. Based on exposure levels and human physiology. 19%. As the Mercy's medical team fought to save their captain, something unprecedented occurred in the diplomatic chamber. The ZTH Kalani delegate approached the human ambassador and performed the rarely seen postural submission their species reserved for moments of profound respect. We have misunderstood, the ZTH Kalani admitted, mandibles clicking softly. Your vessels are not named with irony. They are named with purpose. The human ambassador nodded, eyes never leaving the medical feed. What you're seeing isn't weakness. It's our strength. We begin to understand, the Jian ambassador's breathing sacs inflated thoughtfully, why humans call their medical ships Mercy. 2 standard weeks after the profitable venture catastrophe, Arbor Station hosted a diplomatic gathering that bore little resemblance to the pedantic quibbling of previous sessions. The station's AI was running self-diagnostics to ensure it wasn't malfunctioning at the unprecedented site of cooperative discussion. The holographic display showed the final statistics, 318 survivors out of 418 total personnel involved. The 19.7% fatality rate was being described by xenobiological experts as statistically impossible and by human medical journals as Tuesday. Captain Torres, defying the station AI's probability calculations, was recovering. Their cellular structure had been ravaged by radiation, but the captain was already attempting to review duty rosters from a hospital bed, much to the medical staff's visible frustration. Your captain defies statistical prediction, observed the Maxian representative, neural tissue pulsing with what might have been admiration. We tend to do that, the human ambassador replied with a small smile. It's our most annoying quality, according to most of our own historians. The chamber's atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Species that once maintained careful diplomatic distances now mingled with awkward curiosity, like beings who had witnessed something that challenged their core assumptions. The Jian ambassador approached the human delegate, breathing sacs inflating thoughtfully. We have reviewed our linguistic databases regarding the human concept of mercy. Our translators originally mapped it to our term, kavalprath, meaning the practical suspension of hostilities for mutual benefit. This appears inadequate. Extremely, agreed the human. Your language doesn't have a direct equivalent. Then explain, requested the Zethkalani delegate, mandibles clicking with uncharacteristic humility, what does this word truly encompass? Mercy is compassion when there's no logical reason for it. It's aiding those who can't repay you. It's helping even when it costs you personally. They gestured toward the medical feed. It's running into radiation that will destroy your cells because strangers need saving. This is inefficient, stated the ZTH colony, though without their usual judgment. Spectacularly, agreed the human with a grin. Mercy isn't about efficiency. The representative's crystalline form refracted light in a pattern indicating deep processing. Yet your medical ships consistently demonstrate superior rescue statistics compared to more technically advanced vessels. When you're willing to risk everything for every life, you end up saving more lives overall. Desperation breeds innovation. A holographic communication activated. The Mercy's chief medical officer appeared, exhausted but satisfied. Final medical report, all critical patients stabilized. 97% expected to make full recovery. Remaining 3% will require ongoing care but maintain life quality. The captain is complaining about hospital food, which we're taking as a positive sign. Thank you, doctor, the human ambassador replied. The diplomatic corps has been discussing your ship's performance. The CMO's expression suggested they had opinions about diplomatic discussions that would violate several interstellar protocols. We were just doing our job. Nevertheless, interjected the ZTH colony delegate, mandibles moving in formal appreciation pattern, the ZTH colony hegemony acknowledges a debt. 3 of our citizens were categorized as non-survivable under standard medical protocols. All 3 now live. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. We don't categorize patients that way. Precisely, clicked the ZTH colony. This is what we begin to understand. After the transmission ended, the Tauran observer approached. The mining operation included 15 Tauran workers, historical enemies of the GRAC. In the medical bay of your Mercy, our wounded were treated alongside theirs. No distinction made. That's standard procedure, the human ambassador explained. Not to us, replied the Tauran. This concept requires reconsideration. The GRAC representative rumbled in agreement. 3 centuries of blood feud, yet your medical officer threatened the GRAC security chief to ensure equal treatment. Their massive shoulders shifted in what passed for a shrug. Difficult to maintain hatred when your enemy's child is saved by the same hands that saved your own. Then, said the human ambassador softly, is rather the point. The station's AI interrupted. Diplomatic notification. The Collective Species Agreement Committee has convened an emergency session regarding the events at Mining Operation PX 4791. Several delegates exchanged concerned glances. Emergency sessions typically meant sanctions or condemnations. The committee hereby recognizes the actions of the human medical vessel UNHS Mercy as exemplifying the highest ideals of interspecies cooperation, continued the AI. Furthermore, the committee proposes adoption of Human Universal Code 3 as the standard operating procedure for all disaster responses, regardless of political conflicts. The chamber fell silent, a rarity for professional talkers. Additionally, the committee has approved an amendment to the official Galactic translation matrix. The human term mercy shall retain its original meaning, as demonstrated by the UNHS Mercy's actions. The human ambassador blinked in surprise. Getting the committee to amend the translation matrix typically took decades, not a single incident. There is one final addendum, the AI announced. The committee has authorized the creation of a new medical response division under Joint Species Authority. These vessels shall be classified as Mercy-class ships in recognition of the human concept. They're naming a ship class after us. After your concept, corrected the Jian ambassador, breathing sacs inflating with what might have been amusement. Though perhaps they are becoming synonymous. 3 months later, the first joint species medical vessel launched from the Arbor Station shipyards. Its design incorporated technologies from 17 different civilizations, crewed by medical personnel from 34 species. As per committee decree, its universal translator maintained the human word untranslated. On its hull, ISV Mercy. Across the stars, vessels that had once been simply functional medical transports began to change their designations. The Jian Medical Fleet renamed their flagship, Kavalprath/Mercy, the first dual-language designation in their history. The ZTH Kalani simply added the human word beneath their existing designations. Even the Taurans adjusted their medical protocols to include what they termed the mercy principle, the radical concept that compassion might transcend efficiency. In the diplomatic chamber, the human ambassador found themselves approached by the ZTH Kalani delegate, whose mandibles had once clicked with such disdain. "We never asked why your species chose this particular concept for your medical vessels. You have many words for compassion. Why this specific term?" The human considered. "Because mercy is what you give when you have the power to do otherwise. Our history isn't perfect. We've been conquerors, destroyers, but at our best, we choose mercy over power. Our medical ships represent that choice." The ZTH Kalani's mandibles clicked in understanding. To name something is to aspire to its meaning. "Exactly," agreed the human. "Names have power indeed." The ZTH Kalani's exoskeleton shifted in what xenolinguists now called ironic amusement. "Though I must inform you that our diplomatic corps has submitted a formal protest regarding your garbage scows." "Let me guess," the human grinned. "You finally figured out what irony means." "We have, and naming waste disposal vessels after this concept seems unnecessarily convoluted." The human ambassador laughed. "Wait until you learn about our deep space exploration vessels." "What are they called?" asked the ZTH Kalani, mandibles poised in anticipation. "Hope," replied the human. And for once, the translator didn't even try to find an equivalent.